Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. We have a lot to cover. I'm sure everybody is anxious to get into it. Just first wanted to welcome everyone to our webinar. This is the Be Your Own Tech Support, Hear How CSP Mentors Tackle Common Tech Issues. My name is Katie Otaggio. I am the Engagement Operations Manager for the College Success Program at Envision. Before we get started, I just wanted to share some housekeeping items. We do have time scheduled at the end to go over, have some Q&A time. You can ask questions. If you want to, during the webinar, you can also put questions in the chat feature. But at the end, we'll have that time for questions. You can put them in the chat box, use the raise hand function. If you are on a PC, it's Alt Y. If you're on a Mac, it's Option Y. If you're joining from the mobile app, it's under the More button. So when we get to that point, if you have questions, we'll call on the people with their hands raised, and then you'll be able to unmute yourself. So anyway, again, this is the Be Your Own Tech Support, Hear How CSP Mentors Tackle Common Tech Issues webinar. And with us today, we have 3 CSP mentors. First, we have Glenn Dausch. He is a mentor and he's going to be our moderator today. Glenn works as a web accessibility coordinator and lives in New York. While he doesn't see blindness as a barrier, he recognizes that no two people experience life the same way. In his spare time, he enjoys spending time with his family, reading and playing the guitar. He is looking forward to sharing his experiences both as a student and as a university administrator. We also have Emily Vasile, another mentor. Emily is an assistant professor of the Department of Blindness and Low Vision Studies at Salus University. They are certified in elementary education and special education in the state of New Jersey, as well as a certified teacher of students with visual impairments in both New Jersey and Pennsylvania. They are also certified low vision therapists through the Academy of Certification of Vision Rehabilitation and Education Professionals. Their areas of expertise include low vision rehabilitation and education of students with visual impairments. Born with a cataract in their left eye and later diagnosed with glaucoma, Emily never let their visual impairment define their ability to succeed. In their free time, Emily enjoys hiking, being in nature, yoga, and mindfulness, exploring, reading, singing, and performing, and making art. And last but not least, we have Megan Dausch, another mentor. Megan is an advocate, a perpetual learner, a teacher, cook, and technology enthusiast who loves to read and write. She currently works as an accessibility specialist. College is often a time of challenge, transition, and joyful exploration. Megan enjoys being a part of the College Success Program and supporting students through their journeys in higher education. With that, I will hand it over to Glenn to go ahead and kick us off.
So thank you, Katie, and thanks to everyone joining us this afternoon. We are going to treat today's conversation as a roundtable discussion, touching on all manner of accessibility and troubleshooting. And so briefly, want to go around the room and ask everyone the assistive technologies that they typically use and will be framing the discussion with. So to start off, I typically use a screen reader, multiple screen readers, and use speech to text input when necessary. So Emily, I'll toss it over to you. What assistive technology do you frame this conversation with?
Sure. So I use mostly Zoom text and the built-in magnification features on the MacBook products, as well as VoiceOver on my iPhone and iPad.
All right. And Megan?
Yeah, so I use primarily screen readers such as JAWS, NVDA, and VoiceOver on my iPhone. I also frequently use Braille displays for actually quite a lot of my interaction and did so in college. So for example, the Chameleon 20, the Focus 40, the Focus 14. And I think another really important component that maybe some of our college students might have is they might use a note taker, which is something that I used when I was a college student. So, you might use a Braille note or the Braille Sense 6 or another note taker. And one other piece of assistive technology that I, made use of as a college student and still do today is scanning technology. So the Pearl camera, for example.
Excellent. So, Megan, can you start off? Are there common technical issues that you encounter using assistive technology, and what are some of the ways that you work through those issues?
So I think we all experience, times when our devices freeze or they act erratically. And so, some of the troubleshooting steps I would take would, of course, always to restart the device. Other, I think, common uh, areas that we might experience are when things don't perhaps read well with our screen readers or braille displays. And there are a number of approaches, which, we'll probably get to a little bit later. Um, in this webinar, but you might be on a website and something doesn't read well, or you might have an inaccessible PDF file, or you might be on a website and a table isn't really reading the way you imagine it should read, um, or your screen reader might crash and just completely stop functioning. And so that is something that you'll probably hear a lot today is always have, a backup solution. So always have kind of an alternative screen reader is something that I found really invaluable when I would run into technical issues and still do today, to kind of, always have another tool that does something similar to that tool that I am having issues with.
Excellent. Emily, is there anything that you wanted to add to that before you take the next question?
No, I think that Megan, brought up a great point about having that backup tool, whatever that is. I can't tell you how many times like either Zoom text is moving super slow for me, or like causing my computer to move slow and like freezing up. But knowing your little tricks to be able to operate the accessibility features of any device you're on, like if you're on a PC, using the control plus to be able to make the screen, magnify the screen, control minus to decrease the magnification. I think on a Mac it's command plus or command minus. So, being able to just do those little things without having to rely on additional software is really helpful, especially if things stop working for you, but you still need to be able to visually access a screen.
I think that's an excellent point. Using multiple devices. Sometimes I've had to work out, when Megan was saying earlier about a computer crashing, using the iPhone to scan the screen.
Yeah.
And so you have multiple tools, and you may have to work through a progression of them before you find a solution that works. But having a process by which you do that that's somewhat standardized and gives you a path to think through the situation clearly and not to be stressed about it, because one thing we know is when we're stressed, we're not thinking logically, and we may skip steps. So
Yeah.
being able to just slow that process down really does help. So somewhat relatedly, if you're browsing a website, Emily, or using a particular piece of technology that may not necessarily be assistive technology, and you encounter an accessibility error or an accessibility barrier, what is your process for working through that situation?
I guess depending on like what the software is, like let's say in using Zoom text, I try to always have, like with any software, whether it's Zoom text or my iPhone or whatever, always try to have the user guide nearby in some accessible form for myself, because I often find that I want to like look up, oh, this isn't working, how do I fix this? So if I don't have the user guide, then I usually take it to Google, which has been my new best friend lately. 10, 15 years ago, I probably wouldn't have done that. I probably would have just called like the helpline on whatever it is that I could find software wise. But definitely, for me at least, it's researching whether it's like gestures for voiceover because it's not doing what I want it to, or troubleshooting when something happens with my computer. I seem to be able to find pretty quickly what others have done by searching on, Google is my preferred search engine, but you could obviously use any. So that's usually my go-to. And then also making a point that once I find the answer, I either type it somewhere or write it down. So that way I have a running list of like, this is what happened, or this is what you should do if this happens again. So that way I have a place where I know I can access it next time something like that happens.
Excellent. And Megan, how about you? Are there steps that you take in this process if you run into a website or a piece of software that isn't accessible to you?
Yeah, so there's a few things that I try to do. And one of those things is, like I said before, try a different screen reader. So if I'm on a website and it's not accessible, I will switch to a different screen reader, because sometimes that can actually help, and you can access what you need. Another thing I will do is try a different web browser. Especially, if it's a website, I'll try, a different browser. So Chrome, Firefox, Edge, I'll try them all to see, are there any differences? Another thing, that I may also do is, if I really can't access the website, of course, I would reach out to the company, do some advocating. Additionally, I always try to reach out to my network of blind or visually impaired folks to see, has anyone else had this issue? Maybe there's a workaround that I haven't discovered. Another thing that I'll often do is, if there's an app that does the same thing. So, maybe the company or the piece of software, maybe there's an app, and maybe that app is more accessible. So I always want to try as many things as I can. If it's an issue, related to college, certainly, that you're experiencing at your college, definitely reaching out to your DSO your disability services office is super important, so that they can, support you if needed, to make, changes if necessary. So those are some of the steps that I try to take.
I just like to say, Megan, you brought up a really great point about contacting other people within your, blind and visually impaired community. For me, even like growing up and even in college, I was the only person I knew with a visual impairment. And I feel like that happens to so many of us. So, obviously, if you're here in attendance at this webinar, feel free to be able to reach out if you have questions and things like that. It's really important to build your community of other people with visual impairments, whether you are a screen reader user or not, or whatever device you use, because it's really important, I think, to be able to have that camaraderie of people who understand the difficulties and the struggles you might have in accessing information and might be able to actually provide you with assistance and help. So I really like that you mentioned that, because that's something that I've had to develop over the course of my adulthood that I didn't have as a kid.
And just to also add on to that, I totally, agree with you, Emily. It's something that I think, I know I didn't have a lot of in college myself either, but I think one of the things now I just wanted to kind of mention is that there are so many email lists, so many groups on social media. There are so many different ways to kind of find networks too. If you don't have one, there are assistive technology groups out there, and resources that are maybe more accessible than they were a bit ago.
Yeah, for sure.
Are there particular communities that either of you have found to be particularly helpful, whether they're technology specific or technology agnostic?
Well, I think, whatever community, I think it really depends. But for me, I know, I think I know there's an assistive technology group for example, on Facebook that can sometimes provide resources. I know that both of the major consumer blindness organizations offer listservs for blind students and, different activities. And also too, just a little plug for the CSP meetups, that can be a really great resource for students to come together and ask questions. And if you do have a mentor through the CSP, ask your mentor.
That's a great point. Yeah. I think for me, because I'm also a professional in this field as well as a consumer, a lot of the groups that I'm part of are professional organizations or like Facebook groups that are geared towards TBIs and O&Ms. But I have seen a few people who are not TBIs or O&Ms who are members of the group who will ask a question, say like, you know, I'm a college student and I have visual impairment and I'm struggling with this. What suggestions do you have? And people are more than happy to give advice and feedback and suggestions and strategies. So don't hesitate to join any one of those groups, especially on Facebook, but any social media platform. I think that it's really, I think, a blessing that we have social media in some capacity now, because it really does allow people to connect with each other from all over, and I think provide a great resource for people who need resources in accessibility.
Yeah, that's well said, Emily. And you know, one of the other things that I think is really important, you spoke earlier about going to the documentation for the products, whether it's your assistive technology or whether it's you know, Google Docs or Microsoft Office. And you know, a few years ago, there was no documentation on how to use Microsoft Word with a screen reader or use Google Sheets with a screen reader. And times are changing. And so a lot of the manufacturers are also publishing information on how to use their products with assistive technology. And that to me is also a huge help. And you know, like you, Google is really my best friend in that case, because I know for a fact that the answer's out there, and I know how to find it. I may not have it at the top of my head, but it's quick to, you know, pop a Google search in and find that spot in the documentation that I'm looking for. So
yeah, for sure. And you brought up a great point too, Glenn, that like, I guess like with companies, you know, making user guides or just resources to be used with accessibility software, there are even companies that have, you know, not to say that they didn't have these before, but I think maybe it just wasn't as well known, but have like complete accessibility departments. I know that there's like a specific phone number for Apple products that you can contact that it's specifically for users who are blind or visually impaired. So your questions will be sent, you know, you'll be able to talk to somebody who really understands how to use VoiceOver and can answer your questions rather than someone who's more of a generalist. So that's really cool that resources like that exist.
absolutely.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I just wanted to kind of quickly add on to that too. Maybe it'll come up later, but I wanted to just mention also that Google Accessibility has its own dedicated accessibility support, and so does Microsoft. So it's, I think, you know, a really good resource, you know, if you're having trouble with your, you know, Google Docs, or you're having trouble with Outlook, you know, you can reach out to them and, you know, see if they can help. Microsoft and Google both also have support through the Be My Eyes app on the iPhone. So, you know, that might be can be helpful. I know once my computer completely froze and I had no speech. I couldn't get anywhere, and they were able to, you know, walk me through getting it back up and running. So it can be a very useful resource.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're coming on that point in the semester, you know, almost in the home stretch for many students. And this is where technology tends to, if it's going to break, will break down for students. So when students encounter that scenario of that dreaded paper being due the next day and their computer stops working or their assistive technology stops working, what are some strategies that you would recommend that they can make use of in order to get that assignment done and still make the deadline?
So I would suggest first think about if you have a backup device. Do you have another computer that you can use? Do you have a note taker that you could temporarily, make work for a couple days, for a little while? Um, do you, have some other way of getting that assignment done? Which is why I think it's so important to be able to use more than one device. If you have access to a computer and a note taker, don't just rely on your Braille note taker, but really use both of your devices to their full potential if you have access to that. Another thing I would recommend is if your school has a computer, which nowadays, most schools do have computers in the library for student use. If the school has that computer, NVDA is a free screen reader. Even if your school doesn't have JAWS, if that's what you prefer, they might not have your preferred access technology, but if you're able to access some technology, it's better than not having any access at all at that point if a paper is due the next day. So see if your school can, that you use some technology, whether that's on the computer in the library with NVDA, or even narrator, if you need to, just something to get that work done. If you can, borrow a computer from someone else temporarily, of course, now narrator and NVDA again are both free on Windows. Macs have VoiceOver, so if you have access to a computer, from that you can borrow, definitely do that. Of course, too, there's always the option if your assignment is due the next day, you can, and of course, talk to your professor, explain the situation. There are some times when you maybe need to ask for an extension, and maybe this is one of those times, I'm not sure, but you can consider that on its own merit and for yourself to see if that's something that you're comfortable doing. But definitely, I can't stress enough being able to being comfortable with as many operating systems as you have access to. Even if that is your computer and your phone, even if that's your computer and your note taker, you might not want to write a whole paper on a phone, but maybe you'll be able to do it in a pinch.
That's a great point, Megan. One of the things that I would suggest, and I haven't always done this, but over the course of the last few years, I've made a point, especially when I was writing papers for grad school, is to use some sort of cloud, whether it's iCloud or OneDrive or Google Drive or Google Docs. Using a cloud will allow you to have your work saved somewhere. So let's say you're in the middle of working and your computer stops working or breaks down. You didn't lose all that work that you just did. You can then go borrow somebody else's computer or go to the library and still be able to access your document from wherever it is on that cloud. So that has been something that has saved me over and over and over again. Obviously, you don't necessarily want to store confidential and personal documents on a cloud, but being that a paper for college or graduate school probably doesn't have that kind of information in it, is more than acceptable to store it on a cloud or something like that. But then also, having a backup. I have, I still obviously do save stuff on my computer, but every once in a while, I also have an external hard drive where I always will back up the documents that are on my computer, and I keep them on this hard drive. So that way, in case something does happen to my computer, I still have a copy of them somewhere. So making sure that you have taken the time prior to, to really back up your documents and have them in a place where you can easily access them should you have computer issues. Also, I'm not one to usually get work done in advance. I will say I am a procrastinator and I'm not proud of it. But if you can, plan out your syllabus, plan out your course for the semester, and take a look and say, okay, well, if I know that this paper is due on March 31st, how long do I need to be able to do it? And either, plan out your time in advance, or advocate for yourself and say to your professor, like, I saw this paper on the syllabus. I'm anticipating this is going to take me a little bit longer than what we're given time for. I'd like to advocate, I'd like to ask for an extension. Can I have my paper due a week later instead? So really communicating those needs to your professor in advance. That way you're giving yourself time, but also kind of maybe a built-in safety in case something does happen as well.
So Emily, I'm just going to ask you to put your professor hat on for a second.
Sure.
Submitting that request at midnight when the paper is due the next day is not the time, is it?
That is correct, Glenn. If I will say I have had students who have accommodations and who have, written to me like the day before and saying, I need an extension on the paper. Well, it is in our policy, at least it's built in, that you're supposed to contact your professor in the beginning of the semester and ask for specific assignment extensions and when you will need them and for what for and things like that. So if your paper's due, the next day, I don't want to see an email at 11 p.m. asking me questions about the assignment or an extension, for sure. That is, depending on a lot of different variables, I may still grant the extension, of course, but ideally it doesn't reflect well on you if you're asking for an extension, minutes before the assignment is due.
Absolutely. So Megan, sometimes technical issues are quick fixes, things that we can solve ourselves, but sometimes they're more challenging and they're going to require that we reach out to, either officials at the school or assistive technology vendors or other companies. How do you determine whether an issue is something you can solve on your own, or whether, when it's time for you to go and ask for help, essentially?
So what I do is I go through as many troubleshooting steps as I can. A lot of those we've discussed earlier today. Of course, you always want to restart your device. I know that sounds silly to say, but when we're under stress, sometimes we think it's a huge issue and really restarting just fixes it. So I know it seems probably obvious, but restart your device. And I go through various troubleshooting steps depending on what the issue is. And if I can't resolve the issue, if I still can't access that document, or my Outlook is crashing, even though, I've gone through all the steps that Microsoft has advised. For example, I always, once I go through my typical troubleshooting steps, I will also, as part of those troubleshooting steps, Google, as Emily mentioned earlier, and usually you can find a lot of support articles and things like that. So once I've gone through, all the support articles and, asked my networks and things like that, if I have immediate access to networks, then I will contact tech support or contact, the whoever is making the website or the program, whether it's my school or the vendor, whatever it is. So basically, my recommendation is you have to also take it case by case. If you're really in a rush and you really need to get something done, and you don't have the time to go through all of these troubleshooting steps, and maybe you're not comfortable going through all these troubleshooting steps, and that's fine. Maybe you just prefer calling tech support and reaching out, getting answers right away. You have to do what you're comfortable with. So if you're not comfortable, researching and Googling and finding some of these things, maybe, you prefer to reach out to tech support more immediately. So I think everyone has to determine really that for themselves, when to ask help. No one can determine that for you except you. And you know your own limits, your frustration levels, when this assignment is due. And so I think you're going to be the best suited to determine when you need to ask help and approach tech support.
Excellent. So now you've made that determination that you need to reach out and ask for some help. Maybe it's contacting your school, maybe it's reaching out to the vendor for the particular product or the assistive technology. What are steps that you can take to show either your school or the company that you're contacting what the issue is and what's going on for you specifically?
So one of the things that I think is really important is that you're able to kind of articulate the problem as best as you can and give as many details. So if you say, Google Docs isn't reading right, or spell check isn't working. Okay, well, what's happening? Is the computer, if you're just getting silence? Is it reading the wrong word? Give as many details as you can. Whether you're talking to tech support, talking to someone else, even when you're advocating, asking for colleagues for help, or your fellow blind or visually impaired people, folks, make sure that you articulate the problem as best as you can. So if there are any patterns you've noticed, anything like that, even if you have to talk it out to yourself before you call tech support or before you talk with your disability services or whoever you're speaking with, just make sure you can give as many details as you possibly can. Obviously, you might not be able to, but just think about any details you can. The other thing that you can also do is, if you're trying to show someone what is going on with a particular website, or a problem that you're having, you can maybe take a screenshot of what's going on. You can do a recording, even a Zoom recording, have a meeting with yourself and kind of share your screen and show them what's going on the screen. So I think those are some strategies that I would recommend when you are reaching out to tech support. If you can reproduce the problem, that's also always something that they want to know as well.
That's really a good point. I will say, from the perspective of having talked with tech support from a professional standpoint, being as I've had students contact tech support, it's so important that that you're able to explain what happened and replicate it if you can, because like Megan said, the more vague you are, the less they're going to be able to help you. Like, stating like, oh, it's just not working. Well, you need to know what exactly is happening. So oftentimes what I've done even is, if I'm sending an email, in my email, whether I'm, contacting them via email rather than over the phone, I will actually list the steps that I've taken in an email, and like, knowing in advance the things that they need, I will take a screenshot and I will attach it to my email and say, these are the following things that I've already done. Like, I've already restarted the computer. I've already done this. I've already done this. So then that way they know in advance, and you're not wasting their time or they're wasting yours trying to troubleshoot all of these different things that have already, you've already done on your own. I will say the one thing though is making sure that you yourself have these skills. If you don't know how to take a screenshot, I suggest you learn how, because it's something that everybody, I feel like, needs to know that skill to be able to advocate for themselves if you are needing assistive technology help from a software company or an IT department or things like that. So there are definitely, and maybe that's a webinar for another time, of like, basic tech skills that everybody should know. But I think that is definitely one that will help you to be able to advocate for your needs.
And so, Emily, to your point, one of the things that I do when I take screenshots, because I can't see the screenshot, I will often run the screenshot through OCR just to make sure that I'm not disclosing any additional information that I didn't intend to.
That's a good point.
And so, it's not a bad thing to ask somebody else, to look at your screenshots before you send them. You know, I'm fairly confident when I send things out that I've used the automated tools to the best of my ability. But if it's extremely sensitive information that I might have on screen otherwise, I will absolutely get somebody cited to go in and proof those screenshots, because that's, you know, privacy, as Emily said earlier, is absolutely essential, and it's one of the things that you have to balance with accessibility.
Great point, Glenn.
So in reaching out for tech support, there are some other skills that you end up refining as a student. Megan, would you mind talking a little bit about what some of those skills are and how they help you beyond just the tech side of your student experience?
Yeah, so I think one of the first things that you kind of gain is a sense of self-advocacy. You know, you're taking a problem and you're bringing it to the table and you're working maybe on getting it solved. So you're really working on your self-advocacy skills when you call tech support. And sometimes it's a little intimidating, especially if you're not used to it. You know, you're calling someone you don't know, and it can be a little stressful, but it's something that will also serve you as you continue to go through life, because as you know, graduate college and get a job, you're going to probably make all sorts of phone calls and, you know, have to do a lot of just talking to customer service folks and in general. So I think it also gives you good practice with that. Additionally, I think it really gives you the ability, lets you work on just explaining a problem, kind of distilling the steps that you took, kind of giving a concise overview of an issue and being able to articulate that, which really helps in so many ways. You know, it helps you in writing, it helps you in speaking, it helps you in a lot of ways. So making tech support calls aren't fun, but maybe they can have some benefits besides just, you know, getting your tech problem resolved.
Yeah, Megan, you make a great point. I think about the advocacy piece is so huge, and you're going to need to advocate for yourself throughout your life in various situations. And so I feel like making a phone call to a tech company is probably a pretty I would say low on the bar of areas where we feel like we need to advocate for something for whatever reason, because the people on the other line, the people at the tech company, are there to help you. Like, that is their job. Is they are tech support. They are there to help solve those issues. So they're used to getting phone calls from people with these problems all day, whereas you could have to advocate for yourself, you know, maybe for your accessibility needs at a new job. Maybe you need to advocate for yourself at the doctor's office. You know, there are a lot of different places where you need to advocate for yourself, and the level of importance or intensity, you know, is different. So being able to get the practice, I think, of advocating on a lower level that's not as you know, high energy or high emotions, can help you to feel more confident in just talking more about your needs and what helps you to be able to access things.
Thanks, Emily. And that's a great point. You know, very often when we approach a situation because, you know, that paper is due and things are high stress, we think that's a high stress situation. And in reality, it is because of the time, but in the grand scheme of things, that issue will be solved and move on rather quickly. Whereas advocating, you know, as you said, in a medical situation or a job accommodation, is a lot more high stakes, and certainly being able to practice in these situations is absolutely essential. So Megan, how did you go about becoming more comfortable troubleshooting and more confident in your approach to technology?
I, you know, just tried things. I read manuals also, and I think that kind of gave me a confidence. I'm a very much an advocate of reading documentation, of reading manuals, and then following them and see what, and follow the steps that they lay out. So I think for me though, it really uh, came down to just trying things and realizing that I probably couldn't mess up too terribly. And usually, there's a way to undo if I did anything to cause harm to the computer, which really, there's usually a way out of it. So just kind of being willing to experiment and reading, a lot of reading. I think for me, reading was the key to giving me the confidence to try and kind of troubleshoot myself.
Emily, how about yourself? What process did you take to becoming a more confident technology user and honing your troubleshooting skills?
I agree. It's similar to Megan. I love learning how things work, and I've always been that way. So, whether it's the physical, like of taking something apart to see how it works and putting it back together. I'm not advocating for taking apart an iPad, but I like to explore things. So I've always just been really fascinated with technology and pressing buttons and what sounds does it make? Where does it take you? What things does it do? And I guess, not being afraid to mess up. And I think that's something I notice with my students, but I've also noticed with older adults that I work with, is that fear of breaking something or messing it up or doing something wrong or getting stuck. And that I think we have to let go of that and use this period of exploration and let yourself mess up, because then you're gonna have messed up in a time where it was okay to mess up and you weren't stressed out and pressed for time to get that paper in. And just exploring all kinds of devices. It really lets you figure out what it is that you like and what you feel most comfortable with. I feel like I've used every kind of computer and every kind of cell phone, and then found what I liked and what worked best for my accessibility needs, and also feeling okay with the fact that you don't have to be one or the other. You can mix and match. I feel like, especially sometimes in the blindness and low vision community, it's are you an Apple user or are you PC user? And everybody's very opinionated. I'm like, it's okay. You can be both. I use PC at work and I use Zoom text at work, but at home I use my iPhone and I use VoiceOver and I use my MacBook and I don't use Zoom text. And so I'm learning how to use NVDA at work. I don't use it at home. So it's okay. And it's, I think, encouraged to be comfortable exploring all different kinds of devices. So that way you can figure out what you like the best. And just know that, again, at the end of the day, it's a device. It's a piece of technology. It can be fixed. It's not a human. It's okay if it gets messed up. Yes, maybe it costs money to fix, but in hindsight, in forward thinking, there are professionals out there who know how to fix these devices, so they can always be fixed. Or if they can't, there's another device out there that you can purchase to replace it. But just don't be afraid to explore and just get to know pieces of technology. I really feel like that's the best way to be able to troubleshoot and figure things out.
I think that's really well said, and I think sort of the only way that we learn is through failure. That's sort of the easy way of saying this. Break things. That's the only way you're going to be able to fix them.
Yeah.
You were going to say, Megan?
I was just going to say, great. I think great points, exploring. And I had a teacher who once told me every mistake is a learning opportunity, and also everyone makes mistakes. So it's okay. You can mess up and it's fine. Learn from, everyone makes mistakes, and that's okay. The other thing I just wanted to mention too is if you are feeling a little bit hesitant, in terms of technology, don't forget to try to reach out to your local VR and see if you can get additional technology training, because maybe that can give you the confidence to explore a little bit more.
For sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Megan, is that like, yes, like a lot of what I've learned on my own because I'm a very inquisitive person and I like exploring and figuring things out. But at the same time, you know, don't be afraid to ask for help. And if you feel that you would benefit more from somebody showing you and getting that instruction, definitely reach out and make sure you have those resources, because that's not only a time saver, you know, for you, but it probably also helps if you know your learning style. Probably helps, like, you know, reduce any frustration of you trying to figure things out on your own rather than somebody teaching you.
Absolutely. All right. With that, I want to leave time for questions. We're at about 13 minutes left in our program. So, Katie, I will toss it over to you. If you have a question, as a reminder, we're gonna ask you to raise your hand, and Katie, or put it in the chat, whichever is more comfortable for you. And Katie will be able to either acknowledge you and you can unmute, or read out what we've got in the chat.
Thank you, guys. Yes, as Glenn said, please, now is the time. If you have any questions, put them in the chat. Looks like actually we have somebody who's raised a hand. Rocky, if you would like to unmute and ask your question, go ahead.
Yes, can I be heard?
Yes.
Yep.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much for your presentation. The one question I have, I sometimes have been in situations, and I'm completely blind, so no usable vision whatsoever. And I've run into situations where I'm required in a college course, or even just in a Zoom meeting, to have my video on, and my video is enabled, but the person on the other end claims that they cannot see me, and it seems as though it's an intermittent issue. So is there a way, because I know that, I mean, we're using Zoom right now, I know that all of you probably use it one way or another. Is there a way to be able to tell, to know for sure whether or not video is enabled if you can't see it, and to make sure that the other person can see on the other end?
So a couple of things come into play here. What I typically do, if I have to be on camera for a Zoom meeting, I try to join early or set up a meeting with another colleague or student, just to check the camera, because, to be quite honest, there are any number of areas where video could be impeded in Zoom. Could be an issue with the hardware of your camera. If you're using a laptop, most laptops have a privacy screen over the camera, which slides back and forth. Most newer laptops, I should say. And so I actually have a piece of tape on my work laptop, so I know which direction that has to go. And so even still, I have showed up to meetings with a silhouetted background because I forgot to turn the camera on. So I think the best thing to do would be just to set up a early meeting if possible. But I'll toss it over to our other two.
I think those are all great suggestions. One other thing I would maybe add is try, possibly if you use Ira or a service like that, if you don't have anyone to do the meeting with you early, Ira can help you possibly, you know, check your video. You know, the other thing that could maybe sometimes help is toggling your video on and off again. You know, if you know for sure your video's on, with Alt V, you know, checking your video settings on Zoom, and like Glenn said, you know, your camera settings. So there could be a number of issues. Also could be bandwidth low on your internet possibly as well.
Thank you.
Great question, though. Thanks.
If there's any other questions, go ahead and raise your hand or put them in the chat. I also wanted to mention, I put in the chat earlier, but another great place to go for resources and things is the College Success Program. The website is full of resources that you can sort. We do have a whole section on assistive technology, so you can go there. There is, as I think Megan may have said, one of the mentors at least, that we do have the meetups. If you are a member, you can always call into one of those. And we have a Facebook group as well that our members can join that, and feel free to ask questions there too. So there's lots of other resources available through the College Success Program. It doesn't look like we have any other questions. There will be, after the webinar, we will send out a recording of this to everyone. We also typically do a follow-up blog that highlights a lot of the key points and key takeaways from this webinar. So that will be coming out to you all. Glenn, looks like maybe we lost Glenn actually. Megan, Emily, any last questions, comments, anything from you guys?
I think my just last piece of advice would be just to explore and don't rely on one device, and have fun along the way, because you'll learn a lot.
I guess ditto Megan's response. Yeah, don't be afraid to try any device, and also don't be afraid that anybody in tech support that you call is judging you for doing something wrong. They are there to help when you make a mistake, or when something isn't working. It's their job. So don't feel like you've made the error and that it's something that you've done.
And also don't be afraid to ask for help ever. Ask your networks, whatever you need. Just everyone needs help, so don't be afraid to ask.
And I'll say, sorry, Kitty.
No, go ahead.
I'll say, there, echoing what Emily said, there are no wrong questions. You're not going to be judged for any of this. But even more important than that, always plan. Have a plan in place. Try to just take a step back, think through what the steps that you've taken to get to the situation you're at. And when you're communicating, make sure that you're communicating all of the steps that you took, and what you expect to have happen. And that's going to be what's going to get you the quickest resolution. And then, the second part of planning is have a backup plan. Things do break down. That's just part of how our society works nowadays, being dependent on so many different pieces of technology. And just like Rocky's question before, with so many parts to the puzzle, it's difficult to say what makes the camera in Zoom not function. So just being able to have alternative ways of being able to accomplish the same thing, whether it's like Megan said earlier, using a different browser or a different screen reader, will really go a long way in making this a smooth process for you. Most importantly, go out and have fun. That's we're here to learn, we're here to grow, and thanks for joining us today. Katie,
There was just one question did come in through the chat, which I can answer that one. Are we able to access those resources without being a member of the CSP? Yes, the resources through the College Success Program are available without being a member. They are on the website. You can navigate to those and sort through them. There are other aspects of the CSP that you do need to be a member for. That is the meetups, that is connecting with a mentor, that is being part of the community, the Facebook group. But the resources themselves are available to everyone at no cost. And we actually have somebody else, Lawrence has raised his hand. If you would like to go ahead and ask your question.
There we go. I couldn't figure out how to unmute it. I got it, I think. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, we
Yes.
can.
Got it. So I am currently, I requested online tutoring. My college offers it, but the tutors they never responded, and so I requested outside tutoring help. Because I paid a lot of money for this tutoring, what would you recommend if something goes wrong during a tutor session where my accessibility software goes out and I'm in the middle of a tutor session and I can't get things back to work? Keep in mind that there's money involved, a lot of money.
So just so I understand you, your question is what would you do if your technology failed during a session where you were paying to work with a tutor?
Yeah.
So very often when you're working with tutoring companies, they'll have a policy on what to do when there's a technological issue, because this happens for both users of assistive technology and users who are just using Zoom to communicate with their tutor. So I would go to their policy and look at that to determine what your best steps for moving forward are.
Okay. Thanks.
I would also maybe think about a backup plan, like if you can join, if it's a remote tutoring session, if you can join on, your computer, or your iPhone, if your computer breaks down, or, if you think about other solutions that you could potentially use to possibly join a session.
I didn't think of that. Because they also have a Varsity Tutors app that they don't do their session through Zoom. And so that's another thing, having to navigate the website, because they do have the platform via the website as well.
So is it a platform where you're using web chat or are you voice chatting?
No, it's like web video, but it's like through this it's like a website. They have you
So
click on the link.
Yeah, so you're using their specific software. So like I said, in that case, I'd absolutely figure out what their policies are. Since they're providing the technology, that's going to be the best path for you to proceed forward if there is if something doesn't work.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks for joining.
Thank you. So we are right
You're
at
welcome.
6 o'clock. So I think we're going to go ahead and wrap up. I put in the chat an email address, the CSP's email address, which is csp@envisionus.com, where if you have any additional questions about assistive technology or the College Success Program, you can reach out to us there. But I wanted to thank Megan and Emily and Glenn for their time and all their knowledge and expertise. This has been a great webinar, and thank everyone for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.